Welcome to another session of understanding programming by using C# in our current course of study. In this tutorial, we're going to look at creating a person and customer class using the person class as the base class for a class of customers. So we're going to start off by looking at what's required in our example. We're to design a class of person that's going to hold a person's name, address, and telephone number. Then we're going to use that as a base class for our customer class, which is derived from the person class. This means that the customer class will just add capabilities or properties to the existing person class. Customer class will have a property for a customer number and a Boolean property, true false, indicating whether the customer wishes to be on our mailing list. And then we're going to demonstrate the customer class using a simple application. So let's start off by building our basic application, again using our standard Windows Forms app, and I'm going to call this customer class. Notice I don't put spaces in there because it causes problems down the road. I'm going to store this in a current project directory, so I think I'll put this in my CIS 115 assignments folder for chapter 11. And again, we're just going to create a brand new solution. And again, I'm just going to make this a little smaller because we won't need much to be going on in our customer class. I'm going to go ahead and give this form a different name, or a different title anyways. I'll leave the name alone because if I change that, I will cause problems. So I'm just going to retitle it with the text being customer class, just so we'll know what this one does. Okay, so we need to start off by creating our most basic class by adding a new item, and we're going to give it create a class, and that's going to be our person class. Okay, notice that the namespace when we create a new project is always going to be whatever the project name was. That's why you don't want to give it spaces in that name. It causes problems. Okay, so we need to start off with any properties, which we already know what the properties should be based on our requirements for this application, and that's the name, address, and phone number. And we're going to use, just to make things simple, all of those private strings. So we have a private string underscore name, and we have a private string underscore address, and a private string underscore phone number. Okay, so that's all that. And since this is just a very simple class, we also don't really need to do anything with a constructor. Oops. Oops. Okay, so we're just going to create a simple constructor, because we're not going to do much for this particular person class other than the fact that it is just basically a storage location. We do need to do our normal get and set operators, so we're going to do a public name and then we'll do a get and that'll just be return underscore name. And then a set and that will be underscore name equals name. Or excuse me, not name, but value. And that's all we need to do for our get and set. So from there, we just need to do the same for the other two properties that we currently have. And so that is all there is to creating our person class. And again, the person class is going to be a basis class for our overall application. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And now we need to create another class. So we're going to do another add new item class, and this is going to be our customer class. Except now we need to tell it you're going to use the person class as a basis, or so that it will inherit all of the base operations. Now we only need to add a couple of features to our new class, and if you remember, that's going to be a customer class, a customer number. We'll just let that be an integer, and a Boolean property, true false, which will indicate whether the customer wishes to be on the mailing list. So that'll obviously be pretty easy to get going. So we simply add a private string customer num and a private Boolean add to mail list, and then in our constructor for the customer we simply add to mail list and set that to true, which means that all customers initially are going to have that set to a true value. So then we need to just create our get and sets for those two properties. Once we do that, then our customer class is ready to be saved and used by our application. So I'm going to go ahead and save that and close it, and then return to our form, which we're going to make some modifications to, as well as add our introduction of our customer information into the web page. We begin by just adding a few labels and some text boxes, which we'll use to control where our data is being displayed. So let's go with name Move that over a little bit, and it's going to be, give me a text box to the side of that. And that's going to be, I'm going to call it TB name. And then we're going to need a label for address. And I'm not too concerned about what the labels are. If I were doing this in a production environment, I'd give it a much more meaningful name than that, but I want to just get through this as quickly as possible. So there's my address. And I need a text box here, there, and I'm probably going to need to make it a multi-line. Let's see. First, I'm going to rename it TB address, and give it multi-line true. Notice it automatically gave me some more adjustment handles, so I'll go ahead and give it about 3 lines just in case. And the last thing we need is a checkbox and then I'm going to add a radio button with the information on it. This is going to be our radio button for whether or not the customer wants to be on the mailing list. So I'm going to add a label that's attached to the radio button. First, I'm going to give it a name, RB Mail, and then I'm going to give it text. Don't add me to the mailing list. And then we're going to add a button that will launch a way to test whether that's working properly. So here, to get that action going, I'm going to again add a button. And all it's going to do is take this class information that we're giving it and display it in a message box. So I'm going to go ahead and just shrink this up a little bit just to tighten it up. Let's see, we need to fix this. So the text should be something like display. And I'm going to call it button display. Not absolutely necessary, but at least we'll know exactly which button we are talking about if this application gets more complex. Okay, so there is our basic layout. Now we just need to lay this out in our form code. So we're going to do a view code, and obviously there's not much going on here. First thing we need to do is add a customer and we're just going to call it my customer. It's kind of cheesy, but you could do the customer, which makes it even more impersonal. So again, because I'm doing it this way, it makes it available to anything on the form that we're working with. So the only other thing we need to do is respond to the button click. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my form, double click the display button, and just like that, as we usually do, we now have a wired up handler for that event. And really what we're going to do here is use a try method, the try method that we've experienced before, just so that we have a way to catch any kind of errors that might come along, because we are dealing with customer or user input. So let's start off by pulling the data that the customer is supposed to be giving us. So my customer dot name equals text box name dot text. My customer dot address equals tb address dot text. Again, that's one reason why we made all those things strings. My customer dot customer num equals tb. Wait a second, that's not right. Sorry about that. I grabbed the wrong number. The only thing we're going to have initially is phone num equals tb phone. And again, this is a good time to find out any problems. And as I was pulling in data, I realized I had forgotten to give the user ability to put in a phone number. So that is now fixed. And we're going to go back here and pull that up. TB phone dot text. So there we have the three pieces of data there. And now we just need to add a message box to show off all this data. So there's the message box that's going to show, and we need to add a catch, and then we're going to assume that if any of these things cause an error, we just need to see the error. So that's just going to be a message box show. You can kind of see why the message box is, kind of an all-encompassing kind of nice thing to have. Except one thing I forgot to do, and I wish they would make it so that when you did a try, it automatically created this, but I need to put in this parameter so that it'll show the message. The only other thing that we need to do is do something when the user changes that radio button. And all we need to do there is my customer dot and if we look at our customer source code again, the only thing that we added to that were these gets and sets. So I just need to set add to mail list based on what the status of that button is. So and you'll see that if we used a true false there, we'd have to constantly be resetting it. But what we need to be able to do is pull from the radio button itself what the status is. If we ask it, are you checked? And notice I've left the description open. It's just going to return true or false based on its current status. So I'm going to use that rather than a fixed value. And that should give us the right information. So, time of truth, time of making sure that we don't have any code failures. I'm going to save and close all of my code and my design. I'm going to do, before I run or try to start this, I'm going to go ahead and build it. I always like to do that just so I know right up front, hey, do you have any errors? Nope. No failed. Everything looks good. Created an executable. So let's run this and see how it works. So let's type in my information. Phone number. I'm going to put don't add me to the list and then display. And there we go. Now, again, if I uncheck this radio button, oh, that's right, radio buttons won't uncheck just by clicking on them because they need to be part of a bigger plan. So let's do display. And notice it said true from the beginning. So let's do this. If I run this, just so we know how the logic is set up, if I don't change that, display. Add to mailing list is true. Let me go back to that. If I click that, I should get add to mailing list is false. But it's not coming up that way. So we need to look at that. That means there's an error in our logic. So let's go back to our form code. And let's see. So now we need to see why that is happening. So we're going to put a break on this line of code because we want to see what this is being changed to when that radio button is clicked, what is called. Okay, so we're not going to do a start. We're going to run debug. So there's our code. There's our app. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. Okay. Now we need to step over this. And now we can see that is true. But that's not what we want. What we want is This needs to be inverted. Okay, so let's do this. So now we found out what the problem is. Let's go ahead and jump out of here. And we'll go ahead and close this. And what we need to show, okay, what we need to show is right here, this needs to be not. So it needs to be reversed, basically. So it was just the way we're displaying this, it had reversed the logic. So let's save this. Let's run it. And again, I'm leaving these little glitches in just so you can see how things can be figured out. Okay, so this time what we expect to see is false in our application. And that's what we're seeing, right? And we should check this by rerunning it and then not selecting that do not use radio button. Ta-da! Okay, we're all good to go. So that is it for our basic application and our starting point for the next tutorial. And that will be provided in the near future. Until then, hope you're enjoying coding and learning about how computers work. This has been Professor Shore, and I'll see you in a bit.